Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Mograph.com podcast regarding the many hues of Mograph. I'm Mathias Omotola, aka Major VFX on all your social web stuff, and I'm accompanied by some amazing artists, some personal friends that I've made all over the world and all over the years that I've been in this industry, some amazing, profound artists. And what we're going to be discussing today is the role that race and color and that experience is like in our industry, as well as what is unique about it, what it brings to the industry, and things that we can do to kind of start healing our world at this crazy time, because it's been a really crazy time. So I'll start off with going to my right, and I'll let you each introduce yourselves, because I don't think I can do it as well as you can. But each one of them are amazing. Starting off with Sekani. Sekani, if you want to say hello to the audience.
Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Sekani Solomon. I am a senior motion designer. I was currently at Cash App.
Awesome. Handel.
My name is Handel Eugene. I'm a 3D lead here at Gunner Studios in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, awesome. Sage.
Hey everyone, I'm Sage. That's what everybody calls me. I'm the moderator of the Cinema 40 subreddit, and I'm a design director at Secret Location in Toronto.
Canadian friends up north. And Jonathan Winbush, you guys should be pretty familiar with this gentleman here.
Yeah, should I kick it off with what up? Winbush here. Yeah, my name is Jonathan Winbush. Motion graphics, immersive artist based out of Laguna Beach, California. And happy to be here with these other amazing artists.
Yeah, we're in good shape, and I like it because we got like a majority Gap team on this one. This is great.
They tried to give me braces when I was a kid.
Yeah,
like,
really. That's a whole. We ain't going into that tonight. That's a whole different conversation. It's a whole type of different discrimination comes with that. So I wanted to dive in because look, we came out of coronavirus, and we're not even out yet, right? So we're not even out. So we went into one of the most extreme times in history, right? In global pandemic, the whole world is locked down. And then after that, or just in the midst of that, as soon as we start seeing things get, lightening up, we see an egregious abuse of power and police brutality in the death of George Floyd. And the world erupts. And I say for the first time in my lifetime, I feel that we have the attention of people that we wouldn't have the attention of. People have been reaching out to me, not like Trayvon Martin or any of the other ones that actually had a lot of news coverage. But I think because people are out of work, and college kids aren't in work, there's like just so much more availability to start, putting the focus on change. And that's what I want to talk about is, since that in current events, like how are you guys affected? What have you seen differently in your social spectrum? Are people trying to have conversations as things changed at work? Are new conversations coming up? So what is it like just since that whole event and the protests and everything?
Yeah, I know with me personally, like I've had a lot of people, especially like clients and stuff like that, just kind of reaching out, and giving their support. And it's kind of crazy because it's like stories I've told them in the past about my experience. They're like totally oblivious to it. They're like, oh my goodness, we didn't realize you went through that type of stuff. And it's like, we've talked about it before, but I think like with current events, it's actually people are paying more attention to it because, like you said, everybody's out of work. And so everybody, they're laser focused on what's happening. And now that they're actually seeing it with their eyes wide open, they're just seeing it like in a whole different perspective than what they used to see it before.
Yeah, I'm totally feeling that. Anybody else seeing something similar or different?
Yeah, for me, right now there's not a day that goes by where I'm not having conversations. I like this, especially at work. We're having conversations about, how do we address this, not just at a company level, but also how do we, talk to our audiences about what's been happening. But it's interesting because me personally, like I came into this country 10 years ago, and I had a lot to learn about racial injustices that happen in the United States, and what's interesting is that, so give me a second to get my thoughts here. I think you could actually move on to the next presenter. I feel like there's been so much happening in the last week. It's just been a lot to process for me.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I feel you there. No, it's a tremendous amount to process. It's the interesting thing is, in my personal experience, because I was born and raised here, my dad actually immigrated here, which is, so I'm first generation American, and so I don't have the history, but I was born into it, and I was definitely identified on it, and I've experienced discrimination on both sides, depending on where I lived. It really depended on where I lived. So, and I think because, Jonathan, you were born here too, right, in the U.S.?
Yeah, born and raised Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah, and I'm from Chicago originally. And then Sekani and Sage, you guys were in TNT, right, Trinidad, Tobago?
Yeah.
And Handel, where were you born? Yeah, where were you born and raised?
Yeah, I'm just like you. I'm first generation American. I'm born and raised in Tampa, Florida, but both parents immigrated from Haiti.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a really diverse, range. And let's throw out some of these. I'm going to throw out one of the heavy questions, because for those people who are like, okay, racism is really dead. Have you ever been called the N-word in your life?
Oh yeah, ever since a kid. Yeah, first time.
And those who immigrated here. Anybody? Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was never direct, but sometimes you could tell just by someone's demeanor. Like for me, it was always indirect and passive, which sometimes for me is even worse, because it's like, if you feel that way, you don't even have the balls to say it, but you're going to give me a look, or you're going to do a microaggression that tells me the same thing. And, it's just kind of dealing with that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But on a more consistent basis.
And I feel that's kind of where America has been at dealing with race. It's kind of been this passive aggressive topic, and it hasn't been directly, addressed. It's like, oh, we're going to have all these problems, but we're going to keep them like really passive aggressive. We're going to have all these, politics and laws in place that kind of make things a little bit complicated, but we're not going to be really clear and just say, oh, we're just actively discriminating against you as a group of people. And to me, that's fascinating coming into this country, because it's a different history. You're being treated like it's the same thing. You're being treated like, oh, no one has an idea of where you're from, and I think that's what really hurts the most, is you have no concept of somebody, and then this label is slapped on you, and you have all this negative history attached to you when you're just walking through, the border as soon as you get here. That's like that's a crazy thing. So can you tell more about your experience, like coming over, and what you kind of warmed up to in this, Sekani or Sage, if you want to chime in, like what were some of the big differences that you saw coming into this country?
For me,
it
was the amount of white people. Because in Trinidad and Tobago, Black people are not the minority, we are the majority. So when I emigrated, it was the biggest kind of cultural shift was just always being surrounded by, like, becoming a minority was an interesting kind of thing to happen, to experience. And then the first time that I ever really thought about, like, racism in a way that Americans had to deal with it was I was just walking down the streets with two of my friends from school, and some random guy called me the N-word out of a truck driving by.
Drive-by, like, classic drive-by.
Yeah, it was just like, what just happened? It took me a while to, like, really process it and understand it, because again, like, I'm coming from a place where, I'm the majority race, so my relationship with being Black is very different. And to have to deal with that, just to have to deal with that in that moment, it took me like almost a full day, week to really process what the hell just happened to me.
That must be confusing, because I kind of felt like a majority most of my life, or minority most of my life, because it was like kind of hard to fit in being multiracial. It's like kind of hard to fit in. If you get accepted, great. If you don't, it's a really weird space. So I never felt like I operated safely in a majority before. So that's a really interesting transition, because I'm pretty sure for, you know, our white audience, if they're operating one place and then they go to like Nigeria or Africa or TNT or any of these other places, yeah, it's one thing if you're as a tourist, but if you're trying to like go there and connect with the culture and connect with businesses and start a profession, that must be a whole different set of, you know, things. It's not just, oh, this is a nice vacation, this is a nice beach, you know, this is a nice area. Handel, what about you? You grew up in the South in Florida, right?
Yeah,
What was that
I grew up
like?
in Florida. Yeah, like Florida just in general. I mean, you see signs of it everywhere, right? Like there's a lot of Confederate flags in the South. You know, that's there's one perspective, there's one interesting perspective that I grew up with. I was like thankful to see Confederate flags because that was a sign to tell me where I wasn't wanted. You know, like that was the mindset I grew up with. You know, yeah, it's like, all right, I know not to go there. And that was something that was obvious. It's weird because there's so many different things that you've got like to navigate and you've got to carry with you growing up that's normal to you, but it's like completely oblivious to other people. It's like average. And like that just being one of them. And just like the stereotypes of just a black man in general, you know, like just that in general, that title in general is like something that you carry with you. So that's like, it comes with so many loaded perspectives, so many loaded perceptions, and so many loaded, like, you know, so many different things that come with that title. And to the point where, like, if you're going grocery shopping, or just like if you walk into a convenience store, or just in general, like for example, like I read this online recently, and it's one of those things that I was like, it's such a small little subtle thing, but it was like one of those things that I could relate with so much. But it was like, you know, being black in America is like being afraid to walk into a store and walk out of that store without buying something, you know, because you wonder if they're gonna wonder if like you're stealing something. Like that's like the hard. I've done that multiple times, and I've felt that so many times, you know, like, and I'm just sharing just some different experiences that I've had growing up that are like that have weighed heavy on my chest for a very long time, but it's not something that I've expressed openly and have kept with me. And I thank you guys for allowing us to vent some of these different frustrations that, like, for the longest time we've never talked about, but now it's like we're given permission, you know, to be able to express those things openly, freely, without it being political. You know, like I think for the longest time, whenever we spoke up, it always felt like it was political, right? Like I always felt like, you know, why do you got to do that? Why do you have to say that? Why do you have to criticize this, that? And now for the first time, it feels like you're actually being heard, and you can speak openly and freely, which is great. I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but obviously there's a backlog.
I think that's great. I mean, just knowing like the voice aspect of it, right? And I think it's funny because, you know, when I'm with any of you, if it's just like us, it's kind of already talked about. Like it's a shared experience. We walk into a store together, we already know what's up. You know, it's like we already know what's up. It's like, all right, you kind of want to keep your hands where they can see them anyway. You know, don't be, you know, having your hands in your pocket too much. It's these little things that are just, you know, already programmed societally that I don't think a lot of other people really even understand, because it's not a thought. You get just to be natural, where it's like being a minority, you're walking around as if there's a constant spotlight on you, expecting the worst. It's already the expectation of something negative, so you're already starting down here, and now you have to build up. Which
the hard part on that is that you got to prove. I feel like I walk into any professional environment, I feel like I have a chip on my shoulder where I have to prove that, like, you know, to break those stereotypes. You know, like especially for people that don't know you, who've never met you. You know, like there's a lot of like, you know, you got to break those stereotypes by showing and proving, like you don't get the benefit of a doubt in a lot of cases, you know? So like that's the hard part. I think that's the hardest part, is like people having this certain expectation and you trying to break that expectation and showing that no, that's not who I am, or I'm more than that. I'm not just what you see or the person that you may have experienced at one time or what have you. So
no, I think that's a big thing, and that kind of goes into our first question. And I think a lot of people posted this, but what are some of the challenges that you've seen in the industry? Was one of it. So what have you seen when you're in a room of, you don't have a room of people of color. You are the minority, and you have to, what experiences have you had in this industry with that, or in any industry along the way as you're getting into motion graphics?
Well, for me, it's. Oh, I'm not sure if you're going to go ahead, but.
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
go for it, Sekani.
Yeah, it's just as you mentioned, that is the thing, being that only person of color, being that only black person in the room, because then you feel like you're talking into a vacuum, because you have a perspective that no one in here can relate to, right? And it's that thing that Handel also mentioned, that there's this expectation that people don't really necessarily understand when you're in those spaces, like what kind of misconceptions could come about. And there's always this question, like, does this person necessarily belong? Say, for example, if you go into a studio in a white space, security might look at you like, does this person belong here? Or like even going up the stairs, it's like, oh, who let them in? And again, it's those kind of microaggressions that happen from time to time that can feel really isolating, that you can't necessarily express to people, and they get that. Take, for example, one studio I was working at, just went to grab my lunch, was coming back in, didn't have my key card at the time, but that's super common, everyone does. You just knock on the door, someone lets you in. And I remember this one time I knocked on the door, and this lady came to the door, and she stopped and she squinted, and she's like, do I know you? I don't really know you. I think you're gonna have to go upstairs. And in that moment, you're not necessarily conscious of what's happening, but then it begins to click. Oh, I have my lunch bag. I might look like a delivery guy. Did I just get stereotyped at a studio? I know this is something that happens, more often than not, and it's something I don't think white artists have to deal with or even consider happening to them. So it's things and situations like that. I think has been difficult, and I feel like to even get into those spaces, you have to be above and beyond. You're not given the benefit of being average, and that's also, I think, a issue we need to deal with.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I just want to say, for me personally, like, I've been in this business a long time, and when I first started, I didn't know any other black artists here in Hollywood at all. And so when I was freelancing around, I was kind of known as the black guy. So whenever, people would tell me, like, if I send in my, my portfolio to a company and people are like, oh yeah, Jonathan Winbush, he's pretty good. And they're like, we don't know. I'm like, oh yeah, he was here like a week or two ago. Remember the black guy? And then be like, oh yeah, okay. So it kind of like, it worked for me, but it also, that's not what you want to be known for. You just want to be known for as a dope artist. So it's just being a token black guy in like every studio that I went into. Yeah, you stick out because you're the only person of color there. But at the same time, it sucks because you just want to be known as a dope artist like everybody else. And even like I worked a couple of years in-house at Warner Brothers, and the security guard was a black security guard. And I remember my first day going in for the job, and he stopped me, and he's like, brother, man, do you work here? And I was like, yeah. And he got out of his booth and gave me a hug. He's like, I don't see any other people of color coming into this department at all. You give me hope and all this different stuff. And he's been at Warner Brothers for like 40 years, he said. So,
wow.
I mean, it's just stuff like that just really kind of gets to you. It's like my first day and I'm already emotional at work, It's like you get that extra chip on your shoulder as well, because it's like you were saying, you have to show and prove and show that you belong there.
Yeah. That's a big deal. I mean, it's hard to understand, and I think this happens for women or other minority groups to some degree. They have something to overcome, but I think the stereotype around the black men are just like very harsh. They're very, very harsh. It's like, it's not just incompetency, it's criminality. there's a criminal component here that it's like, oh, well, maybe we don't want to just, rob you and destroy everything. Like how do you get someone to feel safe first, right? So I think it's a unique situation when you look amongst discrimination, where you might not think that someone is up to speed because of their talent, or they whatever the other stereotypes are around certain groups. But to actually criminalize someone and you have a threat for your safety is something very there's something very different about that. You have to let people know and create a space for them to mentally first feel safe. Like, oh, I can leave my phone on the table and you're not just going to like take it. You're not going to like do any of that stuff. So it's always interesting. And for me, it's like just when you walk by somebody and they lock their doors in their car or something, back in the day when you could actually see someone locking the doors. But it was once again, the microaggressions. But I think the one thing that's really unique about this industry, at least where we are now in this time scale, is luckily we can lead with our art now. And it's not just our image. And that's one thing that I like, because half the time I have no idea if it's, a man, woman, or child who actually just created something online. Yeah. And that's the one thing that I like. Most people will see something and the first reaction is, that's dope or that's trash. And that's literally like our filtering mechanism as artists in the Mograph community. And then once it's like good, then we're in and we're interested in their work and their process and, what's their inspiration. Then we go deeper and then we usually get to the person, right? That's at least online. I feel that's kind of how I find a lot of people. And then they're like, oh, this is a woman. Oh, this is a black dude. This is like an Asian person. This is, oh, okay, wow. I'm really kind of learning that after the fact that I already like what they do. And I don't feel too many industries kind of start that way, because most industries, right, it's people, and this is still a people business. But I feel that our art can kind of lead the way instead of, be something that they'll consider after. It's like, well, no, you already knew the work was good. You already knew the work was good. It's too late now. It's too late. Now you're going to have to overcome racism or anything else that you're dealing with, because you already know my work's at the level, and that's why you reached out to me. So I think that's a really interesting thing about our industry as a whole. Let's see what else we got here as far as experiences. Did you guys have any, Sage, did you want to add anything to that convo? Any experiences you wanted to bring into that? Just want to make sure we can get, a time if they have something to say.
I mean, I can say just based off that last point that the way I got into the C4D community was on Reddit, where everyone is anonymous. Mm-hmm. Like everyone is veiled behind that anonymous username. So that's why everyone calls me Sage as well, because that's what everybody knows me by, my Reddit handle, which is like another really interesting kind of twist on this industry. The fact that I got into it basically through a forum. Nobody knew. I don't think anybody knew I was black. Even the first time that I went onto the Mograph podcast, that was back in the days when it was audio only. I don't even think they knew I was black then. Like they knew I was not from America because of my accent, but like, it's interesting that you're right. A lot of it is kind of art led, at least from my experience, before you actually know anything about the person. So yeah, I would agree with that. In terms of my own personal experience, I can't really say. Yeah, I can't really say that, like, other than the same types of things that have already been said. Nothing unique.
Has anyone seen anything like change when someone found out that you were black? Like, okay, it seemed like everything was rolling, be it interviews, be it, all the email communication. They want you to actually come in. And when you actually come in, it feels like the entire tone has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I did not in motion graphics, but like when I was in high school, I worked at Subway, and back in Pittsburgh, I mean, it's like cross redneckish, like it's right across from West Virginia. It's really close. It's when I applied for Subway, like my name, Jonathan Winbush, I guess doesn't sound black. And so they called me, and when I went in there, they were shocked to see a black guy. And the manager actually told me, he's like, oh, wow, Jonathan Winbush, I wasn't expecting a black guy at all. If I knew, I probably wouldn't even have called you in.
Oh,
and I mean, he said that right to
straightforward.
my face, and I was kind of just in shock, but I took the interview anyway. And by the end of it, and he's like, you know what? You're not that bad of a guy. I'll give you a chance. And it's like after we had that dialogue, he kind of, lowered his guard. But it's just that first impression. Like he didn't even get to know me first. But if he knew I was black, he wasn't going to give me that chance at all.
Wow, that's big. A question popped into the chat, and my good brother from the north as well, Patrick Goski, he was wondering, do you feel that art leading the way is a problem? Do you guys see any problem with that instead of the person? I personally don't, but
I don't think so, because art then becomes the equalizer in some ways. At least from that very first impression, we can all compete based on the work. I mean, people have the chance to show their other biases after the fact, but at least with that initial impression, everyone kind of starts off on the same plane.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting because, not being judged on the color of your skin, but the content of your content. This is where I think it is a little bit, it is definitely leading the way. It's like, oh, what's your content like? Okay, that's quality content. We can definitely work with it. So
can I add to that real fast?
Yeah, go for it.
Just real fast, because what's interesting is I've actually been asked that question before in a podcast, and my answer then is a little bit different now, because the beautiful thing about what's going on now is that a lot of our white friends are being educated on the black experience, but to be honest, I'm learning a heck of a lot too, because there's so much information, so much resources out there, and I'm reading and I'm learning, and one of the questions that is being asked is meritocracy, right? Is it a merit based, and what we're all saying is true, but I think one thing that's really come to light for me, which I was aware of, but just kind of subconsciously, is that also too, there's obviously inequality just to get to resources like a computer, or get to resources like education, or get to resources like tools and everything like that. So there's obviously people, that's something that I have to remind myself, because I actually was really fortunate, because I was able to afford, my parents were able to give me a computer. And that's obviously not the case for everybody else. Everybody doesn't have access to those same resources, and that's intentional. That's intentional through the system. And so because of that, yes, if you can get through those barriers, there still are barriers, but if you can get through those barriers and you can break through those, obviously the myriad of other barriers that still exist, and get to a point where you can develop your skills without distraction of trying to work an extra job, or without distraction of maybe a broken home, or without distraction of all the other things that come into play, then yeah, you can ultimately create art that puts you on a level playing field as our counterparts. And again, my response to that was a little bit different a couple of years ago, but again, just doing so much more research. I knew obviously there was a problem in the system, but it's just so glaringly obvious now how much lack of resources there are for underrepresented, underfunded individuals, minorities, and the such. So I think it's a two-part. There is merit based to once you're able to get over those hurdles, but there are hurdles that could prevent an individual from getting to that particular point, which I think is just something just to add to the conversation that we're always mindful of,
Yeah, totally. That's something that was actually our next question, as far as barriers to entry in the industry. And I think, just on that, there's so much more resources. A really great thing that I'm seeing now is, with this shift of focus and attention, I feel that it's kind of like opening a wound that's been infected for a lot of years. And it's we can start clearing out this infection to allow true healing to take place. Even though I'm seeing a lot of, things thrown across the aisle here, is all right, people are trying to make it so political instead of it being an abuse of power. It's yeah, here comes the politics as always, but the real concept is the abuse of power. And I'm seeing, if you guys haven't seen it, I would say watch 13th. It's about the 13th Amendment on Netflix. It's a must-watch for the audience. Check it out. It just gives a lot of history, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't know. If you're just born into this system, okay, our parents just got here, after the Civil Rights Act, most likely, right? So our parents just get here, or your parents have endured this, or your grandparents endured this if you've been here for generations and you've been enduring it. And then you're just born a child of the 80s or after or anything like that. And it's like, all right, it's slightly different, but the system that it was built upon has a long history. And we don't really know that history because we're only taught what we're taught. It's like we're only taught the skill sets, within the education system, which is also institutionalized to teach the winners history, right? We don't learn that much about Indigenous people. And when I read the Indigenous people's history of the United States of America, it's a tearjerker. Man, it is a very hard read to hear about, genocide in our own backyard. And I've actually met and done work and created art with some Indigenous people. And it's fascinating to know what we don't know about this country and the history of race and politics and all these different games. So I definitely encourage people to take a look at that, because it will help understand like some of the psychological barriers, because some of these barriers are very much technical, but then there's psychological barriers that people have to overcome to understand, like, hey, these things are problems, like access to resources and computers. Like you tell somebody who's having a hard time with food or on food stamps and, in a hard situation where they might love art, that now you have to, get, you at least want to get one good graphics card. Like, how's that conversation going to go? Like, but if you can, you really want to get a couple Titans. Like, really? Like,
well, I mean, like what you're saying on the psychological aspect of it, like, I don't understand why is racial equality such a controversial topic? Like, I mean, just like you said, you want to be treated as everybody else. Like, why is that so controversial? Like, I can't fathom, like, in my head, like what somebody else is thinking. It's like, okay, someone says Black Lives Matter, and then they say all lives matter. And it's like, okay, why, like, what's going through your head when you're saying that? Like, why is this such a controversial topic for you? Like, we're all human. Why can't we just all get along,
Yeah, and that's where I think that so much of it has gone politics, right? It's gone so political versus looking at it as a, compassion issue and a human issue, right? If you see a group of people, if you see children being abused by a bully and you don't step in and say anything, I'm going to say, well, you're an unjust person because you wouldn't even say that was wrong, right? And the thing that I see that I say it is definitely political and it's about attention. And I did a whole post on this, but attention is actually really powerful. It's like what we pay attention to. If the media change the narrative on anything and millions of eyes start looking at this, the big thing is, like, if you take a look at the Ice Bucket Challenge that happened years ago, in which I participated in, we didn't know about ALS, but all of a sudden we put our attention on it, and how many millions of dollars went into it. Right? It was like, okay, it affects very few people compared to a lot of other things, but all of a sudden it's one of the biggest charities because so much attention went onto it. And the concept of, if I can diffuse attention away from a serious cause for a serious group of people, Black Lives Matter, there might be a whole political side, but if you can't just like say it okay and comfortably, and you have to say all lives. But this is where one of the things that got me in the political thing, that I said, you know what, this organization or this style of speaking is only an anti-argument, right? It's just taking the attention away from these voices. It's just to override these voices, because I've never seen an all lives matter group of people at hurricane relief. Yeah. Right. So the hurricanes happened in Puerto Rico. How many All Lives Matter people did we see there? In Africa, how many people are feeding All Lives Matter? And Black Lives Matter is a domestic thing. This is a domestic issue. But we've had domestic horrible things that happen, and we don't have this group of people who are claiming the value of life showing up and actually standing by that. They're only showing up when somebody else is talking about something. It's kind of like saying, the polar bears are dying and everybody's like, all bears matter. And it's like, but there's a group of there's a group of bears that are endangered. Well, all bears though. And it's like, it's a harder conversation. And I think it's because it's so politically motivated. And that's one thing that I would love to shift our attention to, is abuse of power. Like, to be able to look at things from abuse of power. If you're a manager, are you really using your power and your position to be supportive, or are you somehow abusing it? If you're a police officer, oh my goodness, you have double the responsibility of everybody else here, because you are a role model for the community, and you have the ability to completely change someone's life when you make an arrest, or you apprehend somebody and it's wrong. I mean, there's so many other issues in that, but I'm still only halfway into the 13th, but I definitely recommend. Didn't want to go too much off on a tangent, but I think that was a great thing you mentioned, Winbush, is the fighting on that concept. And it's going to be a hard conversation for America, right? This is a hard conversation. We have a nasty past. And that's something that I think that we can do as artists, is help bring the conversation out, and at the same time be able to give people a pathway to look at things, but not actually have to go through the personal self-hate that might start developing from it. Because some people are getting, really broken down here because they're having a hard time, trying to adjust to this. It's a lot of poison. It's like, you got food poisoning and now we're purging that, we're throwing up. But this feels like the late 60s, 70s. This is a weird time to be alive. History on this cycle. So let's talk about barriers to entry. Other barriers to entry that you guys see. I definitely think technology is a huge part of that.
I think a lot of it is awareness. I don't think people really know that this is a career path that you can actually follow, that you can be successful in. And I was kind of thinking about that, like, why am I not seeing more people of color at studios in the field? And I was thinking, well, maybe people of color don't know. And that's kind of why, even for me, when I go back home to Tobago, I try to do a talk or like appear in a program just speaking about design, just showing that, this is a pathway people can go to and be successful in. But I think that's, also maybe something to consider. Maybe we do need to do this more educating, just telling people like, hey, perhaps instead of trying to be a doctor or a lawyer or some other field that you might traditionally want to pursue, design or motion design could be an avenue that you could be successful in, where you could showcase your voice and also showcase your talent.
Yeah, just echoing what Sekani said. It's exposure to this field in general. Like when I was getting started in this thing, I couldn't ask, hey, my uncle who's doing this, who's doing art, like, hey, how did you get into this? I couldn't ask, a friend of a friend, like, hey, how did you get into this? Like none of that was available to me. And exactly, I even wrote this down as a talking point, like exactly what Sekani said. I think it's really, really important. This is why they say amplify Black voices, because it's really important to see Black excellence and people who are doing amazing things and making those individuals visible, because you never know who's going to inspire, who's going to encourage. It's just the weirdest thing, especially for me, because I'll get people who will message me saying thank you, and I'll be like, for what? And they're just like, thank you for doing what you do. Just doing what you do, like that's enough for somebody to reach out who saw me doing my thing and was like, I appreciate you. Just like Winbush said with the security officer, like you get those a whole heck of a lot. And so like imagine seeing more and more and more of that. So the more we can see of that, the more people will be inspired, will be encouraged. The more people will have the confidence. That's a huge thing. It's a huge thing. It takes a lot of confidence to be able to say, hey, I'm gonna go down this path that's like, especially again, just like in general, especially if you're like the only Black person that like how much courage it takes to make a commitment to go down a path that you rarely see anybody that looks like you. So that's why it's so important to amplify Black voices, give Black individuals, Black creative, Black women, people of color, diverse voices a platform, so that way they can be able to not only, it's funny because some people might not get the reason behind it, but like some people think the reason behind it is to give them exposure, but it's more for me. I think it's more so for other people like me to see somebody up there on that stage or up there working on that movie or that film and thinking, man, if he can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just, echoing what Handel said, I grew up on an island with 50,000 people, very small, very humble beginnings. And then I think when you see someone that came from where I came from being able to say work on a film like Black Panther, as Handel was saying, that bridges the gap. Because then you're looking into a space that you think is typically reserved for white people, and now you're like, well, hey, there's a black guy in there and he's doing that. Well, now maybe it's possible that I can achieve something similar. And that could, spark something in that person to inspire them to follow that path as well. And again, echoing what Handel was saying, that's why it's important to, have people of color in these spaces, because it's very difficult to pursue something knowing that no one that you know has done it. And I think, just showing those examples really helps to encourage and inspire people to, try to do things and pursue different paths.
Yeah, I think we have an interesting industry as a whole, right? Because the industry of motion graphics, it's kind of existed in different components throughout time. And now in the last 20 years, it's really kind of been pushing more and more to the forefront. And I think, the role model for that, when we all look at the industry, for me is my blonde-haired, blue-eyed, handsome friend, Andrew Kramer. What's up, folks? Andrew Kramer here. Like, he was, to me, he was the icon of motion graphics. It's like everybody did his tutorials. We all learned from him, and it was amazing because he gave away. It was really democratized the way that he actually shared the information. It wasn't behind a giant paywall. It wasn't like too much money to get in anything. It was just really quality educational content. And I think that's a really big, a really big thing is seeing someone like that. And just, well, all of you except Sage, I need to get you on stage at some point. But I got, one of my big things is, working with Maxon for the last, 10 years, a big thing for me was finding those voices that could amplify, uplift, and inspire others. So each one of you, like, I knew, when we met, and I'm very selective in my process of trying to find people that I know, number one, have good energy about the whole subject and aren't divas, because when it matters that you actually have somebody who you can actually look up to, because I feel that anytime somebody takes the stage, and I personally had a hand in selecting them and vetting them, that it's a representation of who I think is a leader, who's somebody who can lead, or if I'm helping them to get to that leader spot, because people are going to be looking at them as they are. Right. And I think each of you are leaders in the industry. And I just want to, thank you so much for just being open to share this with everybody else. So I just want to say thank you, guys.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
Yeah, and then definitely thanks to the whole Mograph team for putting this together. And this is something, if you guys are liking, I'm looking to keep this as an ongoing, maybe a monthly thing as far as the many hues of Mograph. There's a lot of different stories from a lot of different cultures. And, there's so much more richness, I think, when we get to look at the bigger picture. And, Sekani, when I found out you were working on Black Panther, I was like, yes. I was like, yes, we got representation. Like, it was like, how are you going to have Black Panther, but you ain't going to have black artists in the studio? So.
I have to say I was excited as well, because it's like whenever Luke Cage came out and I didn't get to work on it, that broke my heart. So I'm like, there's no black artists on that. It's like I looked up to Luke Cage since I was like a little kid. And so once I saw you guys were working on Black Panther, I was like, okay, finally we have some representation behind like our black superheroes.
Yeah, it's a game changer. It's a game changer. And I think the more that companies can become aware of that too, I think it actually helps the bottom line for companies too. And not just, placating because it's trendy, but actually understand there's value to connect with that market and provide things that, are culturally relevant to that market. Not just like, this is the trend of the week, this is the flavor of the week. No, it's like, how about we actually provide value and valuable content to a community that's unique for them? And I think that's what makes things, really, I think that would be a game changer. Chad Ashley had a question, and that's, what do you think is more important, exposure to the field or access to computer? Hello, Chad, thank you for your question. So access to a computer or exposure to the field in general? Which one do you think is more?
Yeah, it's both.
It's a hard one.
Yeah, it's
without the computer, you can't really get the exposure, right? Because that's where you'd be accessing everything.
Well, I think another thing is the computer is going to help you, because then you can immediately try something. Because if you get exposure to it, people are exposed to it already through seeing movie titles and seeing different things. But if you can't, like, oh, here's a little clip and I'm scrolling through YouTube or whatever and I see a breakdown, I can't jump in, download a demo and have an experience. So I think, I think the computer's slightly higher. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Sekani.
For me, I think it's the exposure. Because I feel like when someone ignites something in you, you figure out a way how to do it. And it's hard to get that passion if you don't have that exposure, right? I mean, even though a computer is a barrier to entry, at some point you'll be able to afford one. You know, I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but for most, at some point, even if it's like a tiny laptop, if you look at the technical barrier to entry now, it's gone down so much that you don't necessarily need the most important computer. So I feel like, you know, if someone's exposed to it and you're like, wow, this is something I really think, you know, I can do and it's something I want to do, that inspiration can then lead to action, which, you know, could then lead to something else. But sometimes I feel like you need to have that spark to, you know, get things moving.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm mixed on it as well. I think that's why we all said both, because I think it's one of those things. If you're passionate about it, but you're in a situation where you're impoverished, like how does the impoverished mind think? Do you know what I mean? It's very different when you already like, I have access. Ooh, I could get a computer. It's like my barriers to entry are 6 levels deep. All right, my passion has to run, you know, a lot longer, which is great. I mean, some you know, the best artists have gone through some of the harder times. You know, it's like making the diamond. But you know, like, is that really the best way to do things? What can we be doing different? And like you said, the barriers to entry keep coming down. I mean, with a $500-600 computer, you can be in a, you know, really good shape. But I think, you know, keep inspiring the next generation and finding ways to let them know, like, hey, your computer is a lot more than something to look at, you know, the internet with. This is something that you can be building skills and self-expression and creativity. And that's a message that, you know, we're looking to amplify, you know, on the show. So I think that's a big deal. Let me see here. Jumping in. You guys ready for another question? Yeah. Let's see.
Send them.
All right. Go ahead.
What you got? Well, one thing I had that I brought with me was just like one of those questions about like what we all can do, not just, you know, Black people, not just white people, everybody in general can do to lower that barrier of entry, to help, to give back to other people. Like, that's a question that, you know, I think is definitely worth talking about and figuring out. Like, let's all, you know, put our heads together to figure out what are some suggestions to lower that barrier of entry.
That's the next question. What were you reading my notes? Reading my notes. Yeah, so barriers to entry. I'm actually seeing some cool stuff online coming in. Someone said we should look at creating a program. I will, you know, I'll actually add these to the notes. Donate your old computer.
Yeah, and then
right.
I know like School of Motion's been doing free stuff. Like, they've reached out to the community for scholarships, and then Lock and Loaded also offered his services out there. So just stuff like that goes a long way. Just kind of, you know, offering the scholarships to people that don't really have access to that type of money to take the courses. I mean, that stuff goes a long way as well.
Definitely. Would you all be interested in donating old computers?
Yeah,
definitely.
Wow, that's already. So I think like some of these ideas, and I think we'll keep these conversations going, but I think that could be huge. And I also think, you know, one of the things is like mentorship. It's one thing to be taking these, but to actually take someone under a wing, you know, having a monthly or bi-monthly call, checking in, you know, that's one of the things I learned when I was working at a Fortune 500 sales company. There was they had a program called Efficacy for Professionals of Color. And it was great because they actually invested in the company, and it was CDW, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. They would resell software for like HP, or just like everybody, like HP, IBM, you know, everybody they would be the largest resellers for in software, big commercial reseller. And they invested in their employees and employee education. And one of the things that I learned there that it wasn't really taught anywhere else is you want to have a mentor and you want to have a sponsor, right? And a mentor is somebody who can teach you the trade, right? It's like, all right, they can teach you the craft. This is someone who's going to kind of get you in the ropes. Like, hey, this is how you want to prepare your portfolio. These are the types of skills that you want to really develop. But the sponsor is the person that can make a phone call from you that's trusted, that will already get your foot in the door. So their personality, their network is already on your behalf. Just as like, you know, if you, Sekani, actually call into any of the places that you've worked that had a good positive experience with you and you make a recommendation, that's a much higher recommendation than just somebody who's throwing a resume around or just shooting a reel. And that's something that our community, the Black community, doesn't really have in this industry, right? We don't have the voice of somebody to be able to speak on our behalf to say, hey, this person actually has credibility. We have experience in the industry. I try and put myself out there as much as possible and let students know. I've traveled all over the world, and I always tell people, hey, here's my info. Contact me. Let's talk if you're looking to move up in the world. But I do believe mentorship and sponsorship is a lot better than is a path that we need to develop in this industry. And I'll definitely talk with Maxon and Mograph and everybody that I can about what we can do as a community to help bring those things into this world. Let's see here. So changes to make the industry more inclusive. Let's dive into that. What do you guys think that we could be doing? I think one of these, the programs, mentor sponsors, computers. I think all that is really good. What else do you guys think that we can do to make the industry more inclusive?
Well, I do have a question on that because like when I used to work at studios, I noticed that it was usually half white and half Asian. So what is the Asian community doing that they're discovering, like motion graphics in the arts field that other cultures aren't doing, like the Black and brown community? Because like every studio I went to is 50-50, half white, half Asian for the most part.
I think we're going to have a panel of some of our Asian brothers and sisters up here to see what that background is like. I don't know that. I mean, I love a lot of stuff from all the different Asian cultures. I mean, I love that. Everything from technology, food, anime, games. Like so much of what I wanted to do growing up was inspired by everything Asia. So that's a great question, and I'll put that down to see if we can get a panel together on that. Anything else we have as far as changes to the industry, make it more inclusive?
I'll just add that one of my favorite experiences in a studio is working alongside Sekani on a project, and that was like one of the best experiences I had as an individual, as a creative in this field, is to be able to have somebody who looks like me, not only who looks like me, but is a good down-to-earth man, and just being able to hang out with him and to go to lunch with him, beat him in foosball, like seriously, man, that was so, it's like when you walk, just imagine what it feels like walking into a studio, especially now, like just being the only Black creative, like especially now, right? Like how that must feel, right? So obviously the obvious answer to that is hire more Black creative, hire more people of color, more diverse voices.
Was that at Perception? Where was that at? Where were you guys?
We worked at Apple and we worked at and Red Volume together.
Oh yeah, okay. Good times.
It's just so it's so necessary. It's so important, man. It's just like especially like if you're dealing with things that you feel like other people can't relate to have somebody to have that conversation with, especially maybe somebody who could guide you, somebody who could bounce feedback, bounce ideas off of each other, to get real with you guys, to share a real story. One of the hardest days going into work for me was the day after the Trayvon Martin case and the day that George Zimmerman got acquitted. Like, it was really tough. I remember it, specifically being from Florida, right? And watching that case so closely and seeing like Trayvon Martin, like with his hoodie on. I took a photo in the 7th grade that looked exactly like him. And I literally saw myself in him and seeing and just having to come into work and just things, everybody's business as usual. Like everything's like nothing's happened, nothing, and just being able, just having to just go about your day, you know what I'm saying? And just like having nobody else there that like, I don't know, it's just like, that's just one of many examples of why like it's so important to create a safe space for an inclusive space for so many other people, so that way you don't have to navigate through these different spaces feeling somewhat isolated, sometimes.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, it's just those day-to-day things too. You want a connection with someone that has the same skin color as you, but share cultural things, as well. Like, the day after Kobe died, sometimes that death may not have the same feeling for certain people that it would for people of color, because, he was a pillar of inspiration. So, being able to talk to a person of color about that, it's something that's really dope. But just on a day-to-day thing, sometimes you just need someone to talk to about certain things that you may not necessarily be able to with white people, and that's just a fact.
There are some days when you show up at work and it's just like, okay, all right, it's there's already a weight that we have to carry, and it's just like, now it becomes super heavy, and I can't just vent about it, because it doesn't feel like a place where people can really relate. It's like, looks like my cousin was killed, looks like my brother was killed. Like that's a really different thing. Interesting enough, in the chat on a different subject, someone chimed in, said, I'm Korean American. I've been speaking to my community about the myth of the model minority. Asians are adopted in white culture to put them under white leadership. It's systematic. Oh, interesting. Well, hopefully I can get you on the show. That's something else that's interesting. But those heavy days and having this group, and I think this is one of the things that's happening right now. We're having this conversation, and I'm already seeing people chime in, and I feel this is going to start building more of a network, right? And more people are becoming color conscious. I hate when people think, that, oh, I'm colorblind. I'm like, well, then you don't want to work in this industry. You're going to definitely want to be able to see contrast, right? Like, you're going to want to see hues. You're going to want to see shades, because there's actually value there. So if you just kind of blank everything out, you're going to miss that. There's actual value in the contrast. There's value in the different shades, and it's something that's worth acknowledging, because it's something that's valuable. Which brings me to a question that somebody had, and this is a really interesting question. Do you see that there's some aesthetic biases? And this kind of also ties into, do you have any like cultural influences that you're really inspired by, outside of traditional US, American culture, that falls into something that's, outside of the American culture that you have? And do you see any bias towards certain designs or design aesthetics when you're working with a studio or certain directors or anything like that, art directors?
I guess for me, off the rip, I can't say I've seen that in my experience, but I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because I'm absolutely sure it does.
Yeah, I mean, I've had it happen to me directly from a network. Like, I don't want to put their name out there, because I was working for a production company. Like, when you work on sizzle reels, they're pitching the show to the network. Right. So a production company hired me to work on the sizzle reel, and instead of just like putting a whole bunch of different B-roll on there, they wanted to actually do like CG previs type stuff to go with the sizzle. And so, like, since the budget wasn't high, I did some real simple stuff. I think I even pulled mocap data off of like what's it called, Mixamo. And like, I didn't want the characters just to be like stick figures still there, so I gave them like breathing animations just for like a little bit of swag to them. And the note that came back to me, like, I could tell the producer was nervous when he said it, but he's like, the network said that nobody black watches this network at all. It's like 95% white people that watch it, and it looks like these characters are getting ready to go to like a hip hop nightclub, pull the swag back a little bit. And I'm like, you realize who you're talking to, right? Yeah.
You gotta drop that swag.
It was simple, like Mixamo, just like breathing animation, like
too much spice
crazy to it. And
there's too much spice in there. They want to dumb it down.
Very aggressive breath.
But that's what they said.
That's too much sauce.
Bring the swag down a little bit. But I mean, that kind of threw me back. It's like, I watched the network too, so I'm just like, how do they pull them numbers?
Yeah, like, wait a second. This was just previs. This isn't even. Come on now.
Yeah, that's what. As far as sizzle world, it's nothing too crazy, but yeah, that was an actual note that came back to me.
Pull the swagger down. I think that's a really interesting, comment right there. It's like holding back self-expression. You know, it's a big thing. Like, kind of reach for the stars, but do it very slowly and not quickly. You know, like, you can reach for the stars, but don't do it too fast. Otherwise, you'll come off as aggressive. You know, and it's a little too much. Where I think when you're of a different color in this country, you can go after things as aggressive as you want, and people are not as they're not as taken back. I mean, there's a couple industries that we can. It's called sports. It's called sports and entertainment. Like, for me, it was a whole different world. I got to see so many different shades of discrimination in my life. I think that's something that's helped me just kind of really love all people and be annoyed by all people simultaneously. It's like I've had such a mix of it because, you know, when I was an athlete at the University of Iowa, we had over 30,000 people there. 728 were Black. Of those, 95 were on the sports teams. You know, that's like 95% of that was like, you know, sports. So it's interesting because a lot of people love me because I was on the sports team, and it's iconic for that community to be part of that. And I just imagined what it was like if you weren't. You know, when I went to Illinois State, and when I halfway through my college career, I actually got a ride home from campus police because he knew me as a transfer, like all of this information as a you know, star linebacker coming from the University of Iowa. And it was just like, that is one thing that I could feel really good about. If I wasn't in the sports arena, I'm like, would I ever feel comfortable in the back of a cop car? You know, if I didn't have this shield of, you know, my white coach and the white head coach and the newspapers all promoting, you know, this new person coming to their town. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, because when I was in Chicago, I never felt comfortable around the police. I've had some bad encounters, you know, when I wasn't doing anything. But and I think that's the thing, is it's hard to see. Like for a lot of people, if you're not in it, it's hard to see it. And, you know, promoting the next generation and to uplift the next, you know, round of artists. And I feel, you know, so grateful to be in a position that we are, to be able to do something about it. And I'm so happy that out of a horrible situation, that people are lending voice to start looking for solutions, and seeing, you know, a bunch of women chiming in too, that, you know, I've reached out to try and help amplify their voice, or reaching out, you know, back online to try and amplify the voices of everybody here today. So I'm really finding it amazing, the support that's going back and forth to uplift each other.
Can I ask a question to the panel?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Have you guys ever had any type of like inner racism, like within our culture ourselves, from other Black people? Just being like, a lot of, you know, like art isn't a thing that we're really known for. And so just like growing up, did you guys ever experience people kind of, you know, just putting you down because you didn't want to play basketball or football, and you wanted to, you know, like read comic books or watch anime, play video games, things of that nature?
Yeah, for me, 100%.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes if you're not into the same interests, well, for me, it was particularly unique because I came from the Caribbean, and like I had an interest in like skateboarding and listening to rock music. So, you know, it was definitely a little bit off the wall. But I think, you know, what I was into, it helped to formulate my interest in design and just weird aesthetics, and taking a different look at, you know, how I approach work. So I felt like it was paramount that I just kind of be me and not necessarily compromise who I was for, you know, other people.
Yeah, because I know I grew up in a white neighborhood, so it's like I felt racism from both halves, just because like I was a Black nerd growing up. So I would be at the comic book shop, I'd be playing Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, watching anime and all types of stuff. So, you know, you're not Black enough for the culture, but you are Black enough for white people to look down on you. So it's kind of like I always had that identity crisis kind of growing up. And anytime I did anything artistic, it was, you know, automatically pushed down as like, you know, put that pen down, pick up a basketball and go play, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely the, Handel, you could go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just saying, absolutely, that's echoing everything you're saying. Like, as well, just like it's a sad stereotype, but like being educated, right, is one of the things that, you know, is surprising to people, you know, or like
being well spoken. You mean
being well spoken?
Well-spoken.
That was one of those things. That was one of those things that, like, that you like well spoken for a black man is one of the things that you hear a heck of a lot of, you know. This isn't something that I experience myself, but it's definitely portrayed in the media. Like I'm fortunate. I got a young son and a young daughter, and you know, just being present in my young son and daughter's lives is like an incredible thing for a black man to do or whatever, as it's portrayed in the media or whatever. And that's like really, really sad. Like that's the bar that is set for us as African Americans or whatever. The bar is set so low. As far as the stereotypes that are portrayed on us. So if we do anything that breaks outside of that stereotype, it's like, oh wow, like you're stepping out. That's an anomaly. Oh, like that's like,
you're a decent human being. It's such a surprise.
Yeah.
I'll just like say this last thing. And seriously, like I've taken upon myself. Not everybody takes this, but I take this upon myself to go about my life and carry myself, trying to shatter all of those stereotypes as much as possible. You know, like any type of stereotype that is portrayed against a black man, or he can't do this, he can't do that. I see that as a challenge to rise to black excellence and literally demonstrate to the world, to other people, that like we're doing great things. And anytime I get that platform, I know for a fact that I'm representing not just me, but I'm representing the stereotype that is the black man, and I'm sitting here trying to shatter any type of expectations or any type, so that way it can kind of shift that perspective of what you might expect or might see inside of a black man. Sekani, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, for me, I make it a point to, you know, every time I see like a black person in certain areas, I love to assume, oh yeah, maybe he's a lawyer, maybe he's an executive. You know, I personally just like to look at black people and think of themselves as doing something, you know, like really dope. But just the earlier point about, you know, being involved in the arts, I feel like sometimes people don't believe on you until you make it, right? So it's like you're not doing the traditional career path. No one knows what you're doing. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? I don't know. Until like you get to a point where it's actually some success starts happening. But also, as you progress in your career and you begin entering more and more white spaces, because the higher you go, it's definitely more white. You know, that's really when you start getting the feeling like, oh, how do you get in here? You know, what's happening? But every time I feel that way, that's when it pushes me to excel even more. Like, I'll tell you why I'm here. Because, you know, I'm a black person and I've excelled in my field, and there's others like me, and this is how we get here, you know? And, you know, it's a tricky thing, but as you progress, you know, I think it's important you have to go into these spaces being bold and always being on top of your game, because, you know, people are always going to question, but, you know, I think it's just important to know what you're about and, you know, always go forth boldly.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because like I'm down in Orange County, which is, I mean, 90% white down Laguna Beach. But when I first moved down here like 6 years ago, everybody thought I was an athlete. Like that's all, like just because of the area I live in. Like I was at the car wash one time and I had a guy come up, like put his arm around me, and he's like, oh, how's next season going to go? I'm like, next season for what? And he's like, don't you play on the Dallas Cowboys? I'm just like, no, you know, I do motion graphics. And he's like, what's that? I'm like, you know, like special effects and stuff. And he just looked so awkward at me, like he didn't believe that I wasn't an athlete. Like I was trying to just divert it, you know? And then he saw my car and he saw like the Steelers license plate. And he's like, oh, that's where I know you from, Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, that was it. And like he wouldn't let it go that I wasn't an athlete. And I got that so many times down here. It's like crazy. Like everybody thought I was a football player. And then what you tell them what you really do, it's just kind of like, they don't want to believe it. Like, oh, you excelled at this? No, you must be some type of athlete. That's the only reason that you're down here, type thing.
Like, you know, the graphics for the Steelers and Dallas Cowboys? I do stuff like that. That's my
I would have rolled with it.
You know, I got it so many times I started to. Like, my wife didn't believe me when I first told her until she experienced it. We were eating at a restaurant. I went to go to the bathroom, and she said when I went and like when I left, people ran to the table like, what team did your husband play for? And that's like when she first saw it. And I'm like, I told you I deal with it every day down here. Like it's
Well,
wild.
start giving autographs and start charging people for autographs, man.
I know.
Yeah.
No, in Hollywood,
Secure the bag.
just walking around in Hollywood when I would go to a party or something, I was like, "Oh, I saw you in that commercial and everything." I was just like, just get the special.
Trying to keep a low profile.
Yeah.
That's right. Just like, hey, it's just our secret. Yeah, whatever. So we got more questions coming in. This was an interesting one I saw because somebody was asking about women of color in creative positions. Have you guys ever worked for a woman of color in a position of like creative director?
Yeah, I gave you her contact, Kaya Thomas.
Yeah.
I've worked with her before. Yeah, she's a really dope artist, and she actually works at Elastic now. But yeah, I mean, she's definitely somebody that you should look out for and definitely get in contact with.
Awesome. Let's see here, the questions. Here's an interesting one. Do you feel as a Black senior creative who's assimilated in white spaces that your voice is equal to your white counterparts?
Shout out to Jordan Lyle.
Shout out to Jordan Lyle.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here. In my company, I definitely feel that. At least I demand that of the creatives around me, that my voice is equal. Like, whether or not they want to give it to me is a different discussion. I demand it. Like when I enter the room and we're having a creative discussion, you're gonna listen to what I say, and you're gonna, you have to demand that respect. And to their credit, all of my colleagues, they listen to me. That's what I found. But if you go in, well, at least I've never gone in not believing that my voice shouldn't be heard. I think a lot of that has to do with, and this is to come back to actually an earlier point. When I was growing up, I was surrounded by people in art. Like my dad is an architect. I have aunts in architecture. Like everybody around my grandfather got a double master's in engineering from Howard. So I was surrounded by a lot of very successful Black people as role models. So when I entered the workforce, I had that confidence built into me from them. So when I go into a room, I'm standing on their shoulders to demand that level of respect, because that's what they got in Trinidad, and that's what they taught me to expect of my peers. So when and it's interesting, but when I shifted over to being a full-time 3D artist, it was a bit hesitant at first, but as soon as you get an opening, or as soon as somebody asks your opinion, I tell them straight up, this is what I think. I don't care if you're the executive producer for 10 years. If you make that decision, I'm going to be like, I don't like this decision. These are my reasons. And you're going to listen to what I have to say. And maybe they don't take it every time. Maybe they don't, it's like, no, young blood, you just, do what I tell you. But every time you do it, you move the needle ever so slightly. And then everyone around you realizes, oh, this kid actually knows what he's talking about. He has legit reasons to back up the words that he's saying. We got to give him the respect. We got to give him the time to say his piece, because it makes our work better. The diversity makes it better when everyone comes at it from a different place, and you put your voice in and you demand that respect. It makes the work better in the end. Yes, it's difficult sometimes, you get in arguments, but the work at the end of the day ends up being better. That's what I've found.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really big deal. And I think one of the things, like you said, is you have ancestry in that space. And I think that's one of the challenges, at least that I've seen, because I've worked with inner city kids in Chicago with junior achievement, right? And going into the classrooms where they don't actually have the representation and the history. They might have been, a lineage of poverty. So holding your head up high where you have that self-worth that like, wait a second, I know what I'm talking about, and I know that I know what I'm talking about, and my voice actually is bringing value to the conversation, where with, people who don't have that, the shoulders of giants, I've felt that I have that with, my family. I'm probably one of the least educated people in my family. My brother's a surgeon, worked for the Saints, people thought he was on Team Shore, but he was a doctor for the Saints and has a Super Bowl ring and all that fun stuff. And my sister is also a realtor and graduated with high honors, and my little sister, she has a master's, and I'm just sitting here with my one degree. I'm sitting there, I just have one degree, but everybody here is college educated. And the interesting thing was on my other side of the family, my white side of the family, all of us went to college. That's not the case with some of my other relatives, which is really interesting, but that having that confidence of your ancestors and a system around successful people. That's why I say mentorship and sponsorship is a big deal, because that is something that people can connect to, and that gives them the ability to hold their head high when they walk into places, that they're represented and they're being, energetically supported by people who've made it and people who are respected, and if you just go off of, the racial stereotypes and the other things in here, and you don't have successful people in this industry to look up to, it's hard to pull on that. You can't just be like, oh, I'm just walking in here and I feel like a really strong connection to Andrew Kramer. He doesn't look anything like me, but I just used his tutorials. It's a very different thing. It's like, oh, I can look up to Sage and Handel and Jonathan Sekani because I've been interacting with them. I've seen their work. I've looked like that. That is a very, very different energetic. It's a very, very different energetic that is supportive just to the psychology and the whole psyche of a person. So
I think what you're alluding to a little bit is imposter syndrome. It's like one of those things where you walk into a space, it's hard for your voice or feel like your voice is being heard when you're the only person of color in the conversation. You can't help but feel like you're standing out. You can't help but feel like you belong. And a part of that has to do with your confidence. I feel like you experienced that a whole heck of a lot. For me, from my experience, in the beginning of your career, and it's you have to spend majority of your career trying to break out of that shell and eventually build up your confidence. If you don't come from a place of I'm confidently standing in my place or confidently speaking up, if that's not part of your pedigree, then it's something that you have to develop over time. It's something that truthfully I'm still developing. Still working on. I'm still trying to find that confidence to be able to speak up, and let my voice be heard amongst the colleagues of other people who don't look like me. It's a challenging thing, especially too when it's you might get certain looks, or you might say something oh, did I say? You start questioning everything. You're self-conscious about everything. Oh, did I say something wrong? Or did I stick my neck out too much? This, that, and the other. All those different things can be swirling in your head. If, like you said, Mathias said, if you don't have that mentorship, or you don't have that background, or if you don't have those experiences of instilling confidence into you from other people, it's just from my experience.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
You don't have to be an imposter, Handel. You're amazing.
Yeah, but this is the thing, because sometimes you don't necessarily know when you come in, because you don't necessarily always get that support. And then you come to realize talking in these professional settings is so nuanced. And then sometimes you have to pick your battles and know when to speak up and not to speak. But as Handel was saying, it took me some time to really, get that. I always had opinions about something, but I always had to know who to tell it to and when to tell it, because sometimes you have to be strategic about how you say things to actually get them done. Because if you say something at a certain point in time to a certain person, it could actually be counterproductive to when you do it at this time, at this other place, which, was also just kind of strange, and just these nuanced things you have to learn working in these white spaces. But as Jordan's question, I think it's through the years of kind of learning and seeing white people navigating these spaces, you kind of figure out how to talk to them, to voice your opinion in a way that they understand and it stands out. And that's not necessarily like changing the way you speak or doing a certain tone, but more so being strategic, but also being blunt enough to the point that they get what they know, but always towing this line of like risk and bluntness. But I guess also being in the industry and then developing, I guess, a reputation for doing good work has, kind of helped people to listen to my opinions, and that's something I'm definitely fortunate for. But still, like, you get an idea, people aren't just going to jump on it and be like, oh, that's amazing. Like, you still have to always, as Sage was saying, tell people like, this is what I think and this is why. You always have to bring that background into it as well. So, it's just a lot of things that comes into it. Sometimes I feel like off the rip, people may not listen to you as much as some of your other white counterparts. But I feel like at this point in my career, because I've learned how to carry across my feedback, I think people listen to me just as much.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point. This point in your career. Right, because when it comes down to business communication, that is not something that's just strongly taught to the African American culture. Business communication is not like how to speak strategically. I mean, I've read at this point hundreds of books on business communication, marketing, psychology. Like, and these are independent. These I had a pretty good program in school for economics and marketing, but there is so much that is not really given to you and not really instructed to you on how to communicate business, wise. And I think that's something that a mentor can really help you with. It's like, oh, getting into the industry, this is how you're going to want to talk to a creative director. You're going to, find out, is this a good time to talk, see where their attitude's at, because it might just be they had a bad day. And now you're going into like, oh, it was a bad day thing, but it came off like really blunt, and it was like, now I got to deal with all this self-doubt instead of me just like, what, I'll catch you later. They're feeling a little bit better. You have that conversation, and now you don't have to deal with that. So there's it's nuance, but then there's also just professional communication that I feel mentors with experience can actually, you could pass that on, Sekani. Like, you guys, passing on what we have now just from this conversation. I know I'm seeing the room light up.
I think health and wellness go a long way with that as well. Like, if you're physically fit and you are what you eat, so like if you're eating correct, you're taking care of your body, like once you start feeling yourself in that aspect, I think that aura kind of like emits from you. And I noticed like when I really started getting into like weightlifting and eating healthy, and my whole figure just changed in general. When I went into the meetings, I went in with the confidence like nobody could tell me nothing. So I just walk up in there like Debo with my style frames, like, you guys are going to respect what I'm saying. And you can kind of see like a difference, just like, the more you take care of yourself, people recognize the aura about you. And, it's like people say like certain people have that it factor. I think that's something that you could develop in yourself. So just like based off of your own self-confidence, that kind of, emits from you, and people recognize it without even knowing that they recognize it. And I think that goes a long way as well. I know in our community, we don't always eat the best, and we don't always, take care of our bodies. And I think that's a big aspect of that too, because if you're eating like junk, your mind is going to be like junk. And then just like your whole composure about yourself is just going to be like in a big slump, and nobody's going to really look up to that. They're just going to push you off. But once you, build yourself up, get your own confidence going, nobody can tell you nothing. And it doesn't really matter at that point. And that's when people really start to respect you.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And like, self-respect, like respecting your body, respecting your mind as well. It's like putting in good quality content. Like, so we're going to be pulling all of our ideas. We do a lot of research and search for different, style frames and concepts here. One of the big things is like, all right, where do you sit in the composition of your own life? Are you treating yourself like a main character? Are you really putting together the components that make up a really good character? Are you speaking confidently because you actually respect yourself, you respect your work? Are you open to positive feedback, like to actually improve yourself? And that self-reflective part, not to just be in a state of victimhood. There are definitely challenges. There's definitely institutionalized things that need to be correction. But as we work towards those corrections, it would be a really big amplifier when you start working on yourself, because any other changes that happen to the system, then you're prepared to be able to actually navigate. Where if you're not, you don't have that internal system really worked out, it's just going to be that much more challenging. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a big one.
Another thing I'll quickly add,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's convincing yourself that your ideas are good before you even build up the courage to tell people what you think. And
now, do you think that's an
the-
artistic issue, or is that like, because I feel that's universal between my white brothers and sisters too, that I think that's an artist thing, or do you think it's something unique in the Black experience about that?
Oh, well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to only deal with art, like especially me now working in an organization, I have to think just beyond what we're producing, but also communicating with an audience and strategy in that type of sense. So, I mean, at Cash App, a lot of our customer base is Black, so I also have to take that into consideration. So now, I kind of have to serve somewhat of a guide in regards to how we talk about things. But then, like, because I'm coming with this unique perspective, and I don't necessarily say I speak for Black people on the team, but because I'm the only Black designer on the team, and sometimes I end up to be having that, I have to make sure and double check in my head, well, if I'm going to say this, it has to make sense. So, that's just, I guess, another thing I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. Let's see here, getting to another question. Emily asks, have there been any particular time someone made you feel more listened to or included in a studio? Do you have an example of that? Or of a time you wish someone would have been more active and welcoming of you? And let me just go with the last part there, just in case it stirs up anything. Is there anything in particular, other than the obvious, that you would make you feel more supported and welcomed? Is there just something that would feel more supportive and welcomed in your experience? I think, Handel, you mentioned it. One thing was just seeing another person of color when you walk in. And luckily you get Sekani here, not just only that, a super high talented artist, but so that was one thing that was mentioned. So I would just bring that up again, seeing somebody that looks like you, or that's like in the same hue shit, it's like, okay, this is a more inclusive environment. I know that's psychologically, for me, that's like, it's a little bit more diverse. But anything else that you guys feel more welcomed by a studio or team?
This is something, I don't know if it answers the question directly, but it's something that I think is worth proposing studios look at and look into, is accepting anonymous feedback, because I think as a young creative, it's hard, and not even just like as a Black creative, especially women of color, women in general, it can be hard to speak up without fear of retribution, and having a space to be able to submit anonymous, because I talk to other creative, I've talked to other Black females who run things past me because she's worried that it's gonna be taken negatively, or it's gonna be taken as if like, it's this angry Black woman who's coming, like this, that, and the other, right? So like, I think that's a really interesting, not interesting, something that's needed to be able to have. Every studio should be able to allow its employees to submit anonymous feedback to their upper management, obviously, whoever, like, it doesn't matter. Just in general, having that space to be able to do that is, I think, really, really important. And I highly, highly encourage every studio to adopt that.
Now, you're saying on the creative as well as professional environment, like any feedback for the company as well as on a project, like, so if it's project feedback, you have an anonymous process where like, so someone gave this comment that, the contrast is a little bit too high. What do we think about that? Are you thinking about that, or just organizationally overall?
Well, I think just in general, organizationally overall, I think it should be embedded in the culture in general, because there's so many people that fear speaking up in general, especially too, like if you're young and you're young creative, you feel so inferior to people who are like that are like high up in management, like especially too, like if somebody gave you an opportunity, like somebody gives you an opportunity, you almost feel indebted to them. So then who are you to speak up negatively against this person who may have done so much for you or whatever? But at the same time, I'm saying this because I talked to a female art director of mine who works at a studio where they implemented this, and she talked about how helpful and important it was, and how it brought to light things that upper managements weren't aware of, or weren't aware that they were doing. They didn't even know, like, oh wow, this, and people are able to speak freely about stuff. So I think that's just one of like the many things we can do as creatives, as we operate through these different spaces, that can help the culture and the environment.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. I mean, I like it both creatively and professionally, because I've been in many environments where it's like, okay, here's your suggestion box, but if your input, like you're not in a room, it's like, all right, everybody take some time to put together some input, and now we're just looking at, here's a creative idea, and now everybody in the room has to just look at what was proposed creatively, instead of, oh, that's coming from her, or that's coming from him, and we know what they're like. It's like you remove that judgment, and it's just that idea kind of filtered. So that's I think that's a really interesting take on it. So it's like just the best ideas forward. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'll say that I do work at a place that strongly encourages everyone to complain upward and never complain down, because that just kills productivity, that kills vibe, that kills creativity. Like, you don't want an issue that you're having festering down the chain, because all the people under you will start feeling that energy, and then your work starts suffering. So they implemented all of these kind of things. They have check-ins. Every person has a check-in with their immediate supervisor every month, and it's an opportunity for you to kind of just complain up the chain. And I think that's actually really helped the company in a lot of different ways. And for me, because I started kind of lower down the food chain, and now I'm a little higher up the food chain, so I have both sides of that happen. It's helped me be a better manager of people. But I mean, being part of the Cinema 40 community on Reddit also helps me be a better manager of people, because you're constantly, the only way you communicate with people is through text. So you have to be really clear with what you're saying and how you're saying it and how you're communicating. And I found actually now that I'm in a position where I have people under me, and I was in a position where I was only people over me, how to manage people and how to make them feel like their input matters, and how to communicate with them, give them the trust. That's a big thing that has come back from the people who've worked under me, and that I've told to people who work above me, is you need to instill a trust in your charges, in the people under you, to feel like they can say their piece to you and that you will listen. Because if you just constantly override them and you constantly talk to them like, you need to do it this way, it's just the inflection in your voice, all of these different things really add up to somebody feeling not like their voice doesn't matter, or if they say something, it's gonna ruffle feathers or whatever. So you have to be really careful, or at least what I found is that method of complaining upward does make a difference. So I encourage anyone who doesn't have that in their company to do that. Regular check-ins is also, I think, a regular check-in where you make that safe space for somebody to say something, and you just kind of listen to it, is also like a important forum for that kind of those kind of grievances, and then it doesn't infect the work. At least that's what I found.
Yeah, no, that's really good stuff. I have more people chiming in on the chat saying that the anonymous messaging is, or the anonymous commenting is something that's really good, that even if they don't implement it, 50, more of the community can at least see your concern. So more people can like just see the idea out there. Someone mentioned a anonymous Black message form, and now it's getting a little bit, all right, let's see here. People are loving it, so thank you so much. Let me see if we got a couple more coming in. Yeah.
Can I throw something out there?
What's that?
Can I throw something out there real fast?
Yeah, go for it.
This was the question that was asked earlier about what we can do like to help be more inclusive, and there's a lot of things we can do right now, but then also looking to the future, there's a lot of things that we can do. And one of those things I think that's really important, and one of the things that like I've been talking to upper management in my studio is doing workshops in your local communities, creating workshops so that way we talked about exposure and how that's important, sparking that passion and that inspiration. So we're trying to we're taking it upon ourselves to start that initiative, to start doing workshops in our local communities, doing studio tours, studio visits, bringing in people from under-deserving communities, underfunded, underrepresented, so that way they can come in and see what it is to be an artist and a creative, working like you can actually make a living and do this. And not only just make it like there's obviously the broke artist mentality, the misconception that people have to get over, and being able to give that feedback to individuals one-on-one, I think is important. And I think just in general, the overall narrative has been hold people accountable, right? Like don't just have lip service, like hold your school, hold your school, your workplace. Politicians literally in all levels hold everybody accountable and make sure that they follow through on the actions that they say. And so I think that's really important. And a lot of people are calling out studios and brands and such to make sure that they follow through. And I think it's important that we as creative, it's not just the big brands, it's the studios everywhere in general. Just make sure you follow through on keeping everybody accountable, because it's easy to speak up. So let's make sure that the checks that these people are writing, let's make sure that they cash in on those checks.
Yeah,
I'd say the workshops are definitely essential. I didn't mean to cut you off, but up in LA, there's a nonprofit group called Create Now, and I used to do a lot of free workshops for orphan kids, homeless kids, LGBT, like really underrepresented different communities up there, and the kids range from like 10 years old to 18 years old. So I just go in and do like After Effects Cinema 4D workshops and just exposing these kids that have like basically nothing, and just them seeing me in general, just like, hey, this guy, made it to this level. He looks exactly like me. I could do this too. So even if they don't understand the programs, just seeing somebody that looks like them just instills confidence in them and helps them out a lot. So even if you're running these workshops, I mean, they're essential just because you want to look up to people that look like you. So I think that's a great idea that you're doing in your city there.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Someone had a question about, do you feel that you get more or less slack, or just to make a mistake? Do you feel like, oh, I really can't make a mistake, I have to be even better than everybody else, not just like, oh, other people can make this mistake, but if I do it, I don't have as much slack, I don't have as much leeway? Is that, you ever experienced that internally or, somewhere in your experience?
Yeah, I would say it's like Jackie Robinson syndrome. Like it's always in the back of my head because, when he went to the MLB, the very first thing he said was like, when you're Black, you just can't be good, you have to be great just to be, considered on par with everybody else. So just in my mindset, that was something that I always just kind of struggled with. Like whenever you're pitching style frames or, going to the meetings and stuff like that, it's like you always want to put in that extra effort just because you want to show, hey, I belong here. And if you just go on with like a medium effort, like some other people do, it's kind of like you look down upon. But if you go to extra effort, like staying at the shop till like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., just really honing in your craft and putting your best foot forward, I noticed that, it's something internal that I struggled with a lot. And I probably went over an extra, but I always just felt that way, like, hey, I'm the only Black figure in here. I have to show that I belong.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, for me, I'm not sure if it was just living the freelancer life, because so much on your reputation and your ability to deliver. But for me, it was always like, yeah, you have to make sure and do a good job, else you may not be hired again at the studio. So you never want to leave a bad impression or bad taste. I'm not necessarily sure if I had less leeway than some of my counterparts, just as artists. But at the same time, I always feel like if I did mess up, it might make it more difficult for another Black person, because you know what I mean? It's just like, as the only Black person in a lot of studios at multiple times, you want to always carry across the impression that Black people come in and we will perform to the highest level. So I guess sometimes it had that added pressure when working at studios.
Just in general, right? In life, just in general, people have, like we talked about this, the stereotype, right? They have their perception and they have their expectations. And I, as a Black man, I don't want to give anybody that luxury of living up to their perceived perception of me. I want to exceed that perception. I want to go above and beyond. That's just the mentality that I have, because again, I know, just like Sekani said, I know if I do a subpar job, then it's gonna make it. It's gonna confirm that bias in their head. Like, yeah. Oh, like he's at, see, like this is what happens when you bring in somebody like that or whatever. Like, I don't want to give that confirmation to anybody. I want somebody to think less of me and exceed that expectation. That's the mindset that I try to carry with me. It's a bit of a burden, right? Sometimes it's taxing, but it's incredibly necessary. It's kind of like lighting the way for other creatives. I'll just share this. I've never said this publicly or openly, right? But like, I got the opportunity to speak at Blendflex last year, and I'll be lying to you if I told you that I didn't want my speech to be the best speech that day. And that's why I put so much effort and work into that presentation, because not for myself, not for my own ego, but as a representation of what Black people are and the best that they can be. Because I knew that if I did a really good job, it could really like send a real shift and real sound wave. And like, oh wow, let's continue to do this. Let's continue to bring in other Black people, other Black creatives onto the stage. We're like, oh, I didn't know that. I wasn't expecting that. So that's something
I think you met that expectation that day. By the way,
yeah.
You blew it up.
I'll let everybody else be the judge of that. But that was my intention going in. Is like, I want to really carry myself to the highest standard, so that way, again, not just for me, but for people like me who see me up on that stage to experience and witness Black excellence, and that's just something that I carry with me.
Yeah, I feel you 100%. That's why every time I do any type of conference, I always have on a suit and tie, just to kind of put my best self forward. Like, when people see you, they you demand respect. Like, even NAB, you guys had me on for NAB Live. I'm at my house, but I had on a suit and tie. Like, I'm not going nowhere, but I just wanted to put the best representation of Black people forward. So even though I wasn't going nowhere, it's like, I got to show up my best self, because I'm representing the community, and I want this to be, the type of figure that they take home. Like, they're clean cut, they're articulate, they know what they're talking about, and it's not living up to the expectations that we think that we see in the news of these people.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to this conversation, I feel like pretty much every Black motion designer that I've worked with works at a high level. Handel, myself, Graham Reed, Jordan Lyle, Josh Berkeley, like, I could rattle off names all day. But even when I was in Scott, like, these guys were doing work at such a high level. And, I feel like we all have kind of that chip on our shoulders, knowing that we're people of color and we're getting these very unique opportunities that we have to work at the highest level possible. And I feel like, usually if I meet a Black creative in the space, like, I know he's dope. Because it's sad, but I feel like in some ways that's what it takes to get to this level, more so.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing as what everyone else is saying. Like, I give myself probably way less slack than I think my company would give me. You know what I mean? Like I hold myself to a very high standard. I try to make sure all the work that comes through me, my team, is always a very high standard. And yeah, I give myself much less freedom to make mistakes than than the company would probably allow. Like, I'm sure they'd be like, no, this is all fine. I'm like, no, this is not fine. I gotta fix this. This is my name, and I put a lot of pride in that, and I put a lot of pride in the work, and yeah, like, you hold yourself to a very high standard.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's appreciated, and it actually shows, you know, and I've invited all of you, you know, to speak in Sage whenever you got time. You know, I'll have a show for you whenever there's time. We'll definitely have you on. So thank you for coming out here. But it actually shows, and taking pride in your work. And that's something I think, you know, for everybody who takes the stage, like I said before, you know, you're taking the stage, you're a representation of everybody who actually looks up to you and who can connect to you in any type of way. So, you know, if you're a Black male, if you're, you know, an Asian female, if you're Latino, like whatever it is, when you can get that opportunity to be on the industry and you can be taking that stage, you have an opportunity to uplift the minds and inspire everybody who can connect with you on that level. And so that's something that I really appreciate you guys, you know, having pride in that and actually, you know, stepping to the forefront and holding that bar up high, and from a place that's actually, it seems like it's from a place of value and not from a place, oh, I have to or it won't work. But it's just like, it's so much more powerful to do that because of the ripple effect that it has on other people. And that I think is something that's very inspiring, to know that it's going to have a positive effect on other people because you're doing it the way you're doing it. Question came in here, Angela, let's see. How do you guys feel about affirmative action quota type job offer? I got a studio interview offer last week, and I suspect it was in response to the protest. I'm going to start off with that one, saying anytime you get a job, that is your chance. If you wanted to work at that studio, if that is your chance to get in, even if it was on a technicality, to go there and do exactly what these gentlemen said, is raise the bar so high that they're saying, wow, we were doing this for affirmative action, but my goodness, we should just really be looking at this community because there's some top talent here. So I personally would say anytime you're given an opportunity and it's something that you desire to go in and give your best, always doing your best is one of the 4 or 5 agreements. And I think it's always a good idea, however it happens. And whenever the stars align and something works out for you, take it. You don't have to question it. You don't have to judge it, but I'll let the rest of the team talk on this.
I agree. If you have a chance, take it. And I think it's just more important for you to be in the space than thinking about how you got there. And once you're there, you know, just do what you have to do, prove your point, whatever their perception is. But more so, you know, once that bag is secured, I think, you know, that's most important. Like, you're there, you're in this space, you're getting to do the work. And when you're inside, it can help change that perception as well. You know, it's more difficult to do things on the outside. So if you have a chance to get in, I say, you know, take it.
I think it's important to note that these opportunities are coming so that way, ultimately we can level the playing field. I don't think these are like special treatments that we're being given. You know, it's like think about the amount of inequalities, the amount of barriers that were laid, you know, for our ancestors, for our parents, our grandparents. You know, like they couldn't even dream about the amount of opportunities that are being presented today. So I don't think we should by any means feel any certain type of way about any opportunities that come our way. We should take it because it's, I mean, it sounds weird to say, but like it's like a small form of reparations for the amount of, like, you know, amount of atrocities that have happened in African American history. So like it's if anything, I don't know, just see it as like an opportunity to, you know, live out your grandparents' wildest dreams by having the opportunity to do things that they could have never dreamed of, you know?
Yeah. Plus, they reached out to you for a reason. They're not just going to, you know, even if it is the affirmative action, they're not just going to hire some bum off the street. Like, they're looking at you at a level of respect. So, I mean, obviously they see quality in what you're doing, and I would say seize that opportunity, because that got you into the position of even being interviewed. So definitely go ahead and take charge and do the best you can to secure that position.
Yeah, I would agree as well, because what's actually interesting about this discussion is that at our studio, we identified that we just didn't have enough women in creative roles. That was a while ago, and we had almost like an affirmative action hiring mandate to bring more women in to our studio to work, and what's really funny is that worked out way better than anyone thought it would have. Like, on the project that I was just working on, we hired 3 juniors. 2 of them were women and 1 of them was a guy. And, you know, after a couple weeks, maybe like a month, realized that the two women were producing at a much higher level than the guy was, and we ended up letting go of that guy for a number of other reasons. But you could see that they appreciated the opportunity that we gave them as fresh out of school juniors to come in and work, and the work reflected that passion. So if you get an opportunity, whether it be affirmative action or not, definitely hold on to it, definitely take it, make the most of it, impress everyone around you. And that's how, you know, you get rid of needing affirmative action, you know, in the first place. The next set of people won't need to be hired based on some random, you know, inequality.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it seems like, yeah, taking the opportunity when it comes is a big thing. And then, you know, regardless of how it is there, it's the understanding that the systems are in place the way that they are, right? We can't change that. And it's very hard. And we're seeing it now. Look at the amount of protesting. These protests aren't happening now. These are the same protests for the same things that happened in the 60s and 70s. We're looking at over 40 years of protest, and we're looking at hundreds of years of people fighting for equality and rights. So to try and change the system from the outside, it's very difficult. So anytime you can get in and your voice can become part of that machine, if that machine is a studio, if it is, you know, a smaller or large studio or whatever it is, you're at least now part of it, right? So you're at least now identified as an employee of that company. You're at least identified with that group, so you can actually start influencing it, and they can look at you, even though you might be looked at as something separate, but you're still something that's actually part of them. And the AV can't deny it, because they have the same legal responsibilities if you're doing anything as an employee and everything else. So the inside is it's a lot easier to make changes. And that's something that I've been on for, you know, since I got the job at Maxon. Was a big thing for me, was having women, because it was like, man, there are amazing women artists, but there's such little representation. And shout out to Andrew Kramer, who showed up in the chat earlier. It's like, we don't have that many Andrew Kramers of, you know, women in Mograph. And that was a big initiative that I was pushing for, and I got a lot of support from the company and Paul Babb, and it was like, hey, this is what I'm going for. And he was like, go for it 100%. And that, you know, getting that permission by having that voice and actually pushing those initiatives forwards, you know, allowed me to be able to get, you know, more than 50% of women at the SIGGRAPH stage, which now so many of them are seen as leaders, and it's huge, and it's such a huge thing. And I feel that that's the opportunity that we can have here, is we're creating more and more leaders, and that's what we need, is quality leadership across all the board. And I feel that that's what we're lacking these days, and that's why we see so much chaos, is because, you know, the police officers aren't holding themselves to the highest possible standard. You know, when we see somebody in our industry that does, you know, bad work, no one's sitting there trying to defend them. No one defends bad work in our industry. We're just like, that's an eyesore, and we know it when we see it. but within certain jobs where you can do bad work, and the people around you aren't going to tell you like, hey, that is terrible work. Like, no one's going to correct you for that. Well, then, yeah, you're not going to get better. You're not going to get better. And I think that's something that we do uniquely here, is like, hey, these are things that we can improve. And we're doing it, for the most part, at least the people that I know, and I've known a lot of people in this industry. If you're part of the crew, if you see me at NAB, SIGGRAPH, or any of our events or meetups and stuff like that, it seems like our attitude is more on how we can empower each other, and not just like, oh, this is our group, you stay out of it, right?
Yeah, just an example of that, like the first time I even had the chance to speak for Maxon, it wasn't because someone chose me, actually. One of my professors from SCAD, he was supposed to talk, and apparently he dropped out. I'm not sure if you remember this, Mathias, but he recommended Austin Shaw.
Okay.
This was like
when we first got you.
Yeah, so six years ago, and he couldn't make it, so he recommended myself and my buddy Jason Diaz.
Yeah.
And I was, this is me fresh out of school, so obviously this is a gamble having these, I wasn't even sure if we graduated, but these students present. But I was just thankful for the opportunity, and obviously it was a gamble for you guys, but I'm very thankful that I had that platform.
It wasn't a gamble, man. The piece that you did with the NFL, that was dope, man.
Oh, wow.
Right off the gate, it was dope.
But real talk. I actually, it was on my list to go to NAB because I saw Sekani in his talk at a young age, and Sekani's like the same age as me. I was like, yo, if Sekani can go up and talk at NAB, it's like, oh wow, that means maybe I should look into doing the same thing. So Sekani, thank you for that, man. Seriously, like encouraging, seeing you up there.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever told you that either.
Yeah, you never did. But I was always encouraging you, like, Matt, dude, your work is so dope and you're such a great speaker. Like, I'm glad that you're doing these talks now because I think you're a natural.
So it's working. So we should keep that up then. Well, I'm making notes. Keep it up. We've got to get more.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
That's just how it works.
There's a question from Andrea, if you guys are still up for. What systematic gates are there that precede entering the Mograph industry? And how can Mograph companies and professionals extend our reach to help open the gates beyond our backyard? That's an interesting question, and I'll chime in on that to get the ball rolling a little bit. One of the gates we talked about earlier is just a barrier to entry, just having just a decent machine. It doesn't have to be anything. And then your artwork, it's like you're going to need to be good at art. Because that's going to start the conversation with everybody, is you're going to have to take the time and do the work. It's not necessarily systemic in the way that, if we're looking at the Fraternal Order of Police and we're looking at some of these other industries, because a lot of people in this industry are freelance, and it is valued that way. This is a very freelance-centric lifestyle, so it's very empowering and self-empowering. So one of the biggest things is to overcome some of those internal psychological hurdles and start just making really good work and then starting to network. But I'll let you guys take it from there.
Yeah. Well, I'll just speak about the motion graphics industry in general. I think the industry itself is unique because you can tangibly prove your value in about 30 seconds with a demo reader, right? In comparison to, say, being a lawyer, a doctor, other professional fields where you have to show a resume, you have to do an exam. No, with this, it's very tangible. And because of that, because it's so art forward, I don't necessarily think there are huge barriers to entry besides your work, but the work itself could be a barrier to entry, if that makes sense. But it's solely, in my opinion, in my experience, the thing that really has worked for me is, having good work. And in a lot of different areas, I think it's not enough to be good at what you do, but I think in motion design, I think that's a huge part of the conversation, especially someone who's actually now looking at portfolios, trying to hire people and build a team. Really having an online presence and having your work online. I think sometimes when people freelance, you don't update their websites. I think it's very important to keep it updated because people looking at it all the time, and it's the worst to see work, but it's like from 2013 and the person hasn't updated their site, so that you just lost a job for no reason. But yeah, that's personally through my experience in the industry. I think it's, fortunately, I think at first impression, it's about the work and then like look to see if anyone's worked with you, reputation is what you think of this person, but at least the work will start the conversation.
Yeah, and I also think that getting out there and just networking with the community is a huge asset, because like a lot of times if somebody in a good position vouches for you, that's going to make a studio want to look at you. So yeah, first and foremost, your work has to be good. But if you have somebody that has, you know, like a good name value in the industry, and then, you know, you apply at so-and-so studio and someone's like, oh yeah, that's a dope artist, you should give them a look, that's going to go a long way as well. So networking is definitely essential into what we're doing as well, because a lot of times it's who you know as well.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, always be networking. This is the mentor sponsorship place. Get some good sponsors, people that, you know, are established in the industry that can speak well on your behalf and your talents and your credibility. That they can lend that to you, and that can just not just get your foot in the door, it could actually raise you up at another level. I think I'll take this as
the last. Can I just throw something in here real quick? What I have seen being a mod of the Reddit, being on Reddit and having to deal with a lot of beginner early artists, what I've found over time has become barriers to entry is the more established artists' kind of affiliation with third-party software and plugins and paid packs and stuff like that. Like, that has become a barrier to entry for a lot of people because of how much that stuff gets focused on in discussions, in training, in you know, just in the industry as a whole. When you come in as somebody who's brand new, you only have a $500 laptop, and then you go to do a tutorial of somebody you find super awesome, like, you know, David Ariev or something, and everyone is using Octane, everyone is using Forester, everyone is using X Particles. These are all, it makes it feel like when you're really early on that you require those plugins to make dope work. So I think shifting the discussion away from specific things like that, like, you know, you need Octane, you need Forester, you need these things. I think we need to shift the discussion away from those things and more toward fundamentals, like, this is how a 3-point lighting setup works. This is how color theory works. This is how composition works. You know, look at your Renaissance masters on how they did color composition, how they did painting composition. Like, these are the things that will make your art good, regardless of your computer power or your plugin or your wallet size. Like, as an industry, that's just one thing that has come up. At least for the people on Reddit, they always asking me, like, do I need Octane? Do I need these things? And you always have to reassure people, like, no, you know, people started with a shitty laptop, not knowing Cinema 4D. Like,
started with a pen and paper. He started with a pencil and paper. Was his
like his first year of dailies is drawing. So yeah, like, but it has become such a focus of the industry discussion that people have taken it. New artists have taken it to heart in a way that we never did, because we kind of came up a little bit earlier in the industry. So I think that's something to just be. Yeah. So it's just something to be aware of if you're making training, if you're at a NAB and you're talking to people or you're on a stage, you know, to be wary of that, because a lot of people are looking at you with those eyes, and the language that we use to talk about our industry, you know, does matter, and people pass it and absorb it in very different ways. So that, I would say, that is a barrier that we kind of need to just focus on a little bit more.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up.
So can I piggyback off that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Just based off of what he was saying about the younger generation, I would say too, you know, as veterans in the game, we shouldn't smash on the younger generation as well, because I see that happen a lot. Like, you know, you never know what these kids are going through when they, you know, it takes a lot of courage for these kids to post stuff up online and it automatically gets smashed immediately. So that's going to kill somebody's confidence. I remember when I first started off, like mograph.net was like the forum to be on. And I remember posting my first demo reel and I just got killed. Like everybody on there just like, you know, threw all the daggers at me and everything, to the point where it's like I almost dropped out of school. Like, I don't think I'm gonna do this, but you know, I kept with it, and you know, I got to where I am today. But you never know what your words are going to do to this younger artist. Like, they're putting their heart and soul into the artwork, and it might not be good, but just give them like some vote of confidence. You know, just tell them where they're misstepping at, help guide them along, and you never know what they're going to achieve. But you know, your hurtful words can just smash their dreams immediately, and they might not even pursue it anymore. So definitely keep that into account when, you know, we see the younger generation trying to come into this field.
Yeah, 100%. I would say if you don't have something, you know, constructive as far as guidance, don't even spend your time on it. Like, that's not a good space that you want to be in, because you don't want to be looking at your eye you don't want to develop the eye of criticism. You want to develop the eye of creativity, right? So if you're not looking at it, like, you should be looking at how do you create and construct something better. Right. I would say a great thing to do for anybody who really likes, you know, trolling folks is go back and watch season like 20 of South Park. It's like 5 years ago or 19. It's just a whole thing on trolls and just how it just ruins society. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going back to like learn. They were future forecasting a little bit, and I think that's a big thing. But yeah, there's definitely a double edge. There's definitely a positive to having access to immediate creativity, and this is the paradox that is called Planet Earth. Is here we are. You have immediate creativity where if I want to work with, you know, a castle, knights, and horses and everything else, I don't have to model all that if I can afford to, you know, grab a pack or two or anything. You know, it's like, oh, all of a sudden, my idea can become manifest so much. And for us, you know, several years ago, it's like, oh man, all right, how can I cheat this castle? Maybe I can just projection map this, and I'll just, you know, all right, there's one horse model, but I'll have to do some work on it. And it's like, now it's like, no, everything photo real. Like right now, no, we have the full model. Everything is like displacement maps. And it's like, what? You don't have to build and cheat all these things? It's like, well, we still do it because it's faster renders, but they don't know that. You know, they don't know that. So that's one of the things. So this current generation that's diving in now is at a huge advantage because they can just pick up where we are today. They can look at the best techniques to create work today. But yeah, getting back to the fundamentals, that was one thing across the board on my 19-city roadshow throughout the U.S. or the 26 cities globally, or I forget now because I haven't traveled in so long, is, you know, everywhere it was like the fundamentals, and not to get lost in the tool and the technology, because the tools and technology are going to keep getting better and better, but the ability to do storytelling and the ability to bring your creative ideas to life and actually compose them well is extremely powerful, and that's something that, you know, not to be overlooked. So it's definitely like both of those things are so very important.
Let me just add quickly. It could be a double. It could be a double-edged sword, right? Because even though the bar to entry technology-wise has come down, now you can't hide behind the software. Because like 7 years ago, if you did a shiny, cool render, oh my God, beast! But now it's like...
He can do reflections, look at him.
Yeah, it's displacement. But now it's just become, you know, so standard that it's more so about your storytelling or your creativity or your design, what you can add. And now that's why I was telling people, you know, as you were mentioning, it's all about the fundamentals. No matter what, the software is always a tool to manifest what you have in your brain. So always approach it from that perspective.
That's huge. Is there anything else you guys want to bring to the forefront? Any other questions? I'll last online. If there's another question that comes in, I'll let that get posted. Big thank you to Dave Cost in the background helping me out, and the whole Mograph team putting in the questions and you know, just allowing this whole thing to take place. And shout out to all the people online who've joined us. I saw Shams in there. I saw a number of people asking about some of our Middle Eastern brothers and sisters and bringing in some of the voices there. Like I said, this is something we're looking to have be an ongoing conversation. So there's a lot of voices to be heard. There's a lot of different cultural backgrounds and experiences to be shared in the world of motion graphics. One thing I wanted to ask, I'll ask this while they get their last questions in, any cultural references that you guys really like? Jonathan, you mentioned some of the same that I have as far as like a lot of anime. A lot of anime, for me, a lot of comic books too. It's like being a black nerd is a different, unique experience. It's not just being a regular nerd. You got to be, you're outcast because you're a nerd, and then you're outcast because you're black. But, you know, so that was a big thing for me is anime, you know, video games and some of those things. But is there any cultures that you guys particularly, you know, gravitate to or within your own experience? Because, you know, from Haitian culture to, you know, Trinidad and Tobago, like those are, you know, there's rich cultures there that are very different. Do you guys pull from any of that in some of your work?
Yeah, for me, I think it's more on a project base. Like say if I'm working on one project, I might, you know, try to pull from a certain vibe, or like another thing I'll pull from a certain vibe. Yeah, I think for me it just depends, because I don't necessarily like to repeat the things that I do, and that's why I try to bring, you know, different energies to projects I do. So my next one I think is going to feel pretty different from the last I did.
For me,
no, go ahead, Sage.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I'm very proud of where I'm from. It has a lot of problems. Sekani can attest to that as well. The place is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But for example, when I cut my reel that I used to get jobs, I made a concerted effort to use music from Trinidad because that's something that I felt very connected to. And I still feel that way. I love Trinidadian music. I like listen to it on the regular. And even though I may not actively inject it, like consciously, I should say, inject it into my work, I think subconsciously my experience and my history and where I'm from influences how I approach problems, how I solve problems, how I deal with design situations. So yeah, like you and then all of the same ones, like I grew up watching anime too, I grew up playing video games, I grew up, you know, like just like all of us nerds, like I was a nerd too. But and all of those things do influence, you know, the work that I try to push forward or that I'm interested in. But I also do try and stay somewhat connected to the art that's happening in Trinidad, because like I said, all of my family is in art in some way or another. So like, you know, yeah, like it does influence me, like Trinidadian culture, Trinidadian art does influence me, just I may not actively be like, this is from Trinidad, and it's, you know.
Nice.
Then yeah, for me, I guess it's not as much cultural as it is technology. Like I like diving into technology earlier and just trying to navigate it for what we do in motion graphics. Like a couple years ago, I like kind of pioneered virtual reality for motion graphics. I did the first couple of hip hop music videos in VR. I did the first ever comedy special in VR. And then just a plug for what I'm working on now, I've been using Unreal Engine for motion graphics. And so just really pounding the pavement on how we can integrate Cinema 4D into Unreal. So anytime there's like any type of technology that wasn't really made for us, I don't know, it just like, it gets my blood boiling, and just like you want to make it work for what you'd use. And yeah, so I would say that's like my biggest influence there, just trying to like trailblaze and pioneer the different tech and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're doing that with mograph.com, right? This is right here.
Yeah. So up every night till like 2 a.m. recording. So
nice.
Getting that course together.
Anything you guys want to promote? Actually, this would be a great time for, because the audience is here because they are interested. They're interested in everything you guys got going on. So please share if you got something. What they should stay tuned for, or vote.
That's what I want to promote. Vote. Go out there and vote.
I would say definitely get Jordan Lyle up here. He has really great perspectives. I'd love to hear his answers to some of these topics. Graham Reed, guys like that. Joash Berkeley. There's lots of Black creators that, you know, I think we need to hear from them. So would love to see another series.
This is something, yeah. So like I said, I'm looking to, you know, hopefully keep this thing going just as an ongoing monthly conversation, just having a special where we can do that. I saw a lot of people looking for, you know, Black women in Mograph. And Jonathan, thanks again for those recommendations. And this is what I'll say to our audience. Like, a lot of people are asking for these. If you know people, send them to me directly, just at Major VFX. I'll be working with Max on we have a show coming up next week on the 18th, so definitely check that out. It's a 3D motion show, so you can just check that out, and I'll be doing stuff there. SIGGRAPH, we have a lineup and a number of people of color in that lineup, and women as well, so I'll be looking to keep them getting more and more. And if these conversations I can keep going here on mographs.com, definitely shoot them to me for people that you like, so I can actually start building this up, because this is still a community effort, right? There isn't just like, oh, you just go on Facebook and search for Black professional women in Mograph, and then all of a sudden you just got everybody. Like, it's not, it doesn't work like that. So we are still a community. So as you are trying to amplify these voices, if you come across somebody that is specifically inspirational to you, just message me. I'm here, and this is a main part of what I've been spending my life the last 10 years is dedicating to amplifying the voices of artists of all type, all colors, creeds, and cultures, because to me, creativity, it removes all those boundaries. When you feel that you can create any idea and you can step into the world of cinema 4D and motion graphics and Unreal, and you can start bringing to life whatever you want, and you become a world creator, that is extremely powerful and extremely empowering for a man, woman, Black, Asian, Latin, Middle Eastern. It doesn't matter. You can bring your ideas, and no one can really restrict you in that space. And that's something that I personally think is a big change that can happen on this planet, is when everybody's feeling empowered that their voice matters, because they can just make it themselves anyway, and we're getting to that point. So thank you, and please reach out to me. Thanks to the team at Mograph. And yeah, we'll see you. Thank you, Beeple, for showing up and showing your support. Thank you, Shams. Thank you, Emily. Christopher's still on here.
So
what you got?
Plug the course real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, big shout out to mograph.com. I'm actually working on the course for them. It's the second course that they're doing for Unreal Engine. And so it's all about using Unreal Engine for motion graphics, integrating it with Cinema 4D. So I'm hoping to have it out next month. I've just been recording like crazy since NAB. I think, Mathias, you actually gave me the idea to do it. So yeah, thank you for that. And then School of Motion, I'm coming out with a mini series with those guys as well, all on Unreal Engine, and get ready for Unreal Engine 5 and everything that comes along with that as well. And then also make sure you look me up on YouTube. I do weekly tutorials on there, youtube.com/Jonathan Winbush. And yeah, that's all I got for now.
Awesome. And all of our handles and stuff like that are going to be on Mograph, so you'll be able to follow this. So make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll see you all at the next show. Thanks, everybody.
Follow me.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, you guys come to the next show. I need to have you on another Max.
What's up, Swanee?
Yeah. Thanks, you guys, for hosting this. It's been amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right.
All
Ciao.
right.
See you, internet.
Take care.
Boom, nice
All right. Great job, man.
I'm so hot right now.
Oh yeah, you get to put on. Look at you.
Dude, are you in a row?